Hello and welcome to usbiologyteaching.com. My name is Brad and today I'm going to talk to you about how to create a cohesive biology curriculum. Basically what I'm going to talk to you about is a little bit of insight into how I created the biology curriculum here, and with that information you should be able to replicate the process to create your own curriculum. So some of the things you need to consider are your state standards, the student population, assessment, lesson arrangement, previous learning, resources that are available to you, and what the school policies are. So let's just start with the state standards first. Chances are, when it comes to standards, they're not usually negotiable. You work for a state, and within that state, they have standards or assessments that your students are going to be given with the assumption that you have taught your students to those standards or using those standards as a guide. So it's important for you to take some time and review the language of those standards. You want to pay close attention to the verbs and the products that are listed within the standards. For example, I've chosen to use the Next Gen Science Standards. This one happens to be about cells, specifically cell division. So looking at this, it says use a model to illustrate the role of cellular division, mitosis, and differentiation in producing and maintaining complex organisms. So your students in this example would have to build a model or use a model to illustrate the role of cell division. So the key words here are illustrate, use, and model. You definitely want to make sure that as you're addressing the standard, you have that the activities and opportunities for your students to go through and actually do those things, do what the standard wants them to do in order to properly prepare them for the assessment that is likely going to occur at the end of the school year. For the curriculum at usbiologyteaching.com, I chose to use the Next Generation Science Standards. I chose the Next Generation Science Standards because there were a lot of stakeholders involved, individuals who were engineers, scientists, and even teachers that all worked together to develop the standard. Standards also align very well with what most states already have in place. Therefore, I used those standards so I could help as many teachers as possible with the curriculum that we had. So regardless of what standards you're working with, just make sure you pay attention closely to the language that's being used. Next, you need to consider your student population. You definitely need to know your students when creating the curriculum, or get to know your students. Ask them how they learn best, so you could include those types of activities within your curriculum. So you also want to make sure you provide activities that are attainable and also engaging for your students. Another key to designing a good curriculum is to make sure you have a lot of variety. So you want to mix it up as much as possible. So one of the things I see is that sometimes teachers, they have specific things that they like to do, and they may be awesome at first for the students, but if you're doing the exact same thing, for example, if you have a vocabulary strategy that you're using and you're doing the same thing over and over and over every week, the students do the same game, it definitely loses its value, it loses its edge, I guess, the more students are doing it. So it's important for you to use a variety of instructional strategies. And you can still do those activities that you love. It's just you definitely need to mix things up for the students to ensure that they don't get bored. You could have the best activity ever, but when you do it hundreds of times um, with the same group of students, they're going to get bored of it and they're going to lose interest. So you have to make sure you mix those things up. So after considering your students, you also have to think about the flow of the lessons. So what I mean by this is that students, when they walk into your room, they should know exactly what the expectation is. Meaning they should know that they're going to be doing a bell ringer every single day. It does not mean that the activity or bell ringer activity is going to be the same every day, but the students should know that that's part of the flow of your classroom and that they can then anticipate what's going to happen next. Not only does that reduce the anxiety for students in terms of like what are we going to be doing in class today, but it also allows you to buy more time for instruction as your students are walking into the class, they're getting ready prior to the bell or the time of class time starting. It kind of gives you that edge and also allows you to take care of some of your procedural things. So it's not just a structure for students or a flow for students, but it's also a flow for you. Now, again, the activities don't have to be exactly the same every single time. Next, you got to consider how you're going to arrange your lesson plan. In the US biology teaching curriculum, I like to use the 5E model. And with the 5E model, you start off with engagement, students explore, they explain, they extend their knowledge, and then it is evaluated. So the template that you can find on the page below this video, you can download and use that template, and it follows this model. So feel free to use that. One recommendation I would make, depending on your class length, some people watching this video are 40 minutes, some are at 80 minutes, so it really depends on your class. But you really want to break your class up into 20-minute segments. Students start to lose interest in what they're doing after about 20 minutes, depending on what the activity is. Now, I have for the most part at the end of that, and that's because not all activities are going to fit that 20-minute mark exactly. So you really just need to think about what's going to fit best for that lesson, but you definitely don't want to uh, extend your direct instruction beyond a 20-minute segment. You're going to lose your students off of that by doing that. Next, you can see down there at the bottom an example of kind of how the flow of a classroom could look like. So basically, students walk in, they're given a bell ringer or engagement activity, and then they can proceed to another activity. Um, That could be a direct instruction, it could be a hands-on activity, it could be a choice board activity, it could be whatever you want it to be. Um, After the engagement, they're going to then proceed to that activity. And then finally, you need to have some sort of closure to your lesson. So during a closure, it could be a quick evaluation, a little multiple choice 3-question quiz. It could be throwing a beach ball around the room to review some vocabulary terms. It could be asking students who are wearing green to stand up and tell you one thing that they learned from the class that day. So but you should absolutely end the class with some sort of closing activity that tells the students, hey, class is over, this is what we learned, you're reviewing concepts from the day, and also giving a peek into any homework assignments they have or what they can expect for the next day of class. The next thing to consider is assessment design. So assessment design is going to depend a little bit on your school policy and the expectations that they have. So do you give students grades? Chances are pretty good that the answer to that question is yes. Why do you do it? Chances are that is because your school requires it. It's an expectation. So with those things in place, you do have to design assessments that are going to determine what your students have learned. Now, you also have to consider that it's not just you who are going to be assessing the students. It's likely your state that is going to be determining what the students have learned as well. So it's important that you design assessments and that you design them in a way that they're as fair as possible for the students. It's also good if you can include a variety of assessments when applying that to the students' grades. So you should use formative and summative assessments. When looking at curriculum, one of the biggest flaws I see is the assessments not being aligned with the content that was taught. So there are times when teachers actually give assessments. I've seen it where teachers give assessments on content that they have not even taught their students, and that is not what you want to do. So some people actually prefer to build their assessments first when designing curriculum, and that is definitely something you can do. For me, that is not my preferred method. I actually prefer to design the instructional pieces first and then go to the assessment. Then I can use the assessments to tie in to very specific things that we've done within the classroom. On the previous slide, I mentioned that I prefer to build the content first. So that's where this comes in, building the strong foundation of the required content. So using the standards that you are given by the state, it's important for you to sit down and actually design content around those standards. So one way to do that is to start with a PowerPoint presentation or a presentation of whatever method you like. If you like Prezi, you can do it that way. And to just build the presentations that have all of the content that are going to be assessed. Now you can then choose to either give that to your students through direct instruction or to print it out and just give it to them to have as a resource that they can reference as they go through and explore content. But they need a resource that they can fall back on and study to ensure that they can be successful on the assessments. So teachers can also provide resources after students do the exploration of the standards. So one thing that I find that can happen is sometimes teachers avoid actually doing the direct instruction piece or avoid giving students that um, piece of information that is going to help them be successful on the test. For example, there are some activities that you might ask students to go and do some research. Well, if the students are researching a particular topic and they don't happen to come across the information that you're going to be assessing them on, it's not really fair to actually give them an assessment on those points unless you have very strategically guided them to those um, pieces that you're going to be assessing them on. So the caution here is just to make sure that you point your instruction in a way to allow your students to find the information that they need and make sure they're exposed to the content before giving it to them on an assessment. All right, so that was a lot of information to throw at you, but we're going to put it all together right here. So first, if you recall, we started with standards. Once we look at the standards, we can then start to build our PowerPoint presentation. Then we're going to supplement the presentations with a variety of instructional strategies that are going to allow our students to work through the content. And we're going to shift that content or the activities about every 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to make sure we add in our bell ringers and exit activities that are going to engage and assess and also allow our students to practice the content. And then finally, you're going to develop your formative and summative assessments to put into place. So next, I'm going to show you kind of what a lesson plan layout is going to look like, and then you'll be able to take the template and get started on designing your own curriculum. Alright, here's just one of the lesson plans of our 20 different units that we have at usbiologyteaching.com. At the top, I have the title, the grade level, and then I include some things like the amount of preparation that is needed prior to class. So depending on the unit, you might have to set up a lab or cut up some materials depending on what you're doing that day. Next, you can see the standard that's being addressed. Again, starting with the standards and then developing the content. The objectives that I hope to take away from the standard, and then essential questions that students should be able to answer when they're done with the lesson. Next, you can see the different types of assessments that are going to be used, materials list, and then setting the stage, or the very first part of the lesson. So when students walk into the class, here is the bell ringer that they will be given. So in this first example, you can see that they're going to be looking at a picture. Next one, they're going to be labeling a microscope, and these are all kind of tying into the activities that were done in class. It could kind of spiral around and revisit some information, practice skills, whatever it is that you want to put in there for your bell ringer. The next is the acquisition of skills, or the exploration, the explanation, and elaboration pieces are all going to fit into kind of the main part of the lesson plan. And you can see the PowerPoint presentations in this are kind of broken up into small chunks, but students are also, in addition to the PowerPoint presentation, exploring the content in a variety of other ways, using labs, using worksheets, using like the cell sidewalk chalk activity that we have. And then finally, you come down, you have a closing activity for each day, and to continue, we have the differentiation piece, higher differentiation for your gifted students, and then your lower differentiation students for your struggling learners. A place there for a lesson reflection in case you want to change some things, what went well, what did not go so well, and then even our extensions. So with all of that tied together, it makes for a pretty cohesive lesson plan in addition to all the other lesson plans. So it all kind of comes together in a nice piece to make up your full biology curriculum once you're done. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like the video, feel free to share it on Facebook. If you're interested in our full biology curriculum with all the stuff already done for you, you can go to usbiologyteaching.com/full biology curriculum. Thanks again.